I know. You've been waiting all week, wondering, having sleepless nights, tossing and turning. What could the surprise be? Well, wait no longer, because I'm here to tell you that this week's surprise is more so of an announcement. I am here to tell you that I have added a second segment to this podcast, or a second channel. I don't know what the proper word is, but basically we will now have the Monday motivationals, or the motivational Mondays. I know the titles keep getting mixed around, but the motivational Mondays on Mondays as per usual. But every Wednesday we will also have an Agony Aunt episode. Now, the Agony Aunt episodes will be episodes where we read, Reddit stories, or hopefully down the line we will also be listening to letters that you send in. And I will just be reading your letters or reading the Reddit posts and sharing my opinions, giving advice, and whatever else, I like sharing my thoughts with people, and I would love to share my thoughts with you. And who doesn't love a good gossip sesh? So to get us through the hump day, we will be having our Agony Aunt episodes. They will not be as long as these Monday motivationals, because I know you love me, but not that much. So I'll try to keep them brief, under 20 minutes. Just read the story, give my opinion, and cut it off there. So I'll see you on Wednesday. And I hope you enjoy our first episode. It's actually not super spicy, you know what I mean? But I thought that we should maybe start off a little light, and then get into the really juicy stories later. So see you on Wednesday, and let's get into today's episode. Alrighty, so now that we have the surprise out of the way, let's get into today's episode. So, because we have 2 episodes coming out, I will try to make this week's episode short so that we have a cumulative time of at least like 40 minutes. Including, so basically this week's episode, today's episode, and Wednesday's episode will, total to 40 minutes. That won't always be the case, but at least for the first episode, let me try. Now, today we're, sort of going to hop off the life as a fat person train. And don't worry, I'm coming back to it. But, what was really, I guess, on my mind this week was the idea of routines, right? When we think of like setting up good routines and whatever, we talk about like going to the gym and, deciding to eat breakfast, or like, a good morning routine. You wake up and you journal and you exercise and, all these wonderful things. And, if you have the right routines, then you're living the life, right? And in some ways that is very, very true. And not even in some ways, that is true, right? You are your habits. And even with that saying, right, you are your habits, oftentimes for me, what comes to mind when we speak of habits, for me at least, I think about the things we do regularly, right? But I don't know, for whatever reason this week, I started to think deeper about the idea of habits, right? The idea of habitual behavior and how something becomes a habit. Um, so yeah, I was thinking about, how many times do you have to do something for it to become a habit? How much time has to pass? Like, what is the vibe here? What's the formula? And I don't think that I've come to any formula, but I think I have come to at least the logic behind said formula. And as a result, it has also expanded my idea or the image that I have in my mind when I think of habits. Because, like I said earlier, you think of habits as like these physical things that you do. But for me, at least, the revelation that I had this week was that habits can also be intentions. Habits can also be sort of not necessarily an active doing, right? That for something to be a habit, there needs to be a certain level of muscle memory involved, and there has to be a certain level of predictability, right? That there's a portion, if not the whole thing, can be done, without thinking. And, I'll move away from being abstract and give you examples to bring you into, the mind or the sort of the image that is now being conjured in my mind. So let's think about, let's say, driving. I know. I'm back on my fucking driving metaphors, but I promise it's going to make sense. If you're a driver, I'm sure, and if you've been driving for some time, I'm sure you've experienced this thing where sometimes you find yourself, somewhere, like you've been driving for some time and jiggy, are in the next town over, and you don't even sort of remember driving sort of that section of the road, right? It's happened to me before where, I'm driving to work or I'm on the freeway and we're kind of just like cruising at 120. And I don't know, my mind wanders, and before you know it, like I'm all the way, in the north of the Western Cape, and I've been driving maybe for like 5 minutes. And I don't remember actually driving, you know what I mean? I don't remember changing lanes because, I was in the fast lane and now I'm in the middle lane. Like, when did I change over? Did I check my blind spot? Like, how did I not get into an accident, Um, but I've been driving for so long, and I've been driving that road for so long that, you know, it's just muscle memory, right? Um, and that's kind of the thing, right? If you have the habit of doing your bed, when you wake up or whatever, like you don't even think about it anymore. And that's the power of the mind, right? That once something becomes routine, or once it sort of just becomes part of your life and how you operate in this world, your brain decides, like, okay, I don't have to spend energy on that thing anymore, because it stops even becoming a decision. And that, for me, I think, is once you that's the point. That's the point in which you cross over from sort of just a thing you do and cross over into it becoming like habitual, right? It's when you don't even have to think about it anymore. You just do it. It's not an active decision anymore that you make. But it's almost like a compulsion at this point, right? Like your brain doesn't know anything else. Um, yeah, so you do your bed every time you wake up, right? You brush your teeth when, your first step is wake up, do your bed, go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, you know, take a shower, eat your breakfast, get dressed, whatever. I don't know what your routine is. You know what I mean? But you can kind of do it like mindlessly, especially if you're still a little groggy. You went to bed late last night. You kind of just like wake up and you're a zombie. Your whole morning, you've eaten breakfast, you've had your morning coffee, you've grabbed your briefcase, all of these things. You're doing this whole thing mindlessly. You get into your car, and you don't even remember starting the ignition, but here you are, you're on the road, you know? And you didn't have to actively think about any of it. And a lot of things were happening. Every single muscle in your body was working to get you out of bed, to, move you around your apartment or your space. You're now operating a machine that has gears and, an engine and wheels. All these things are moving, but you're not actively thinking about any of it. You know what I mean? Now, with that being a habit, right? And I'm sorry, I know I've gotten lost in the weeds here and painting this picture for you, but I promise it makes sense, because the point that I'm trying to make is, right, that you have done this thing enough times back then when it wasn't a habit, right? When your mind had to still make the active choice to either, slip out of your bed like a snake. That's how my mom would describe it when I was growing up and I didn't do my bed. She was like, you slithered out of your bed like a snake, sort of shedding its old skin and not even turning around to look at it, just leaving it all behind. Um, but yeah, when before it became a habit, when you had to decide, am I making my bed or am I leaving it as it is, right? And you chose each time to do your bed for whatever reason, right? Be it because you were afraid of your mom or your parents, right? Or because you just like a tidy space, or it was like a little treat that you would leave for yourself for later that evening, because there's nothing nicer than crawling into, a bed with crisp sheets, just like a neat, beautiful bed with, fluffed up pillows, crisp sheets, just, it hits different. So that's the little treat that you give to yourself each morning, whatever the reason may be, right? You made that choice over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where, statistically speaking, any rational person would then assume and even predict and maybe even bet money that the next morning you will make the same choice. That it becomes a quote unquote, pun very much intended, no brainer. That you will do your bed the next morning, that it doesn't even, like, come on. You will do your bed tomorrow in the same way that I am certain the sun will rise tomorrow. It has happened enough times that I have no reason to question that it will rise tomorrow. I don't need to be a scientist to come to that conclusion. I've been here long enough, and I have noticed for myself that yes, sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's whatever, but it being cloudy doesn't mean that the sun is not there, right? So, in the same way, the brain doesn't have to ask itself anymore. That you've done it enough times for it just to be a fact. We don't have to think about it anymore. Now, at the risk of sounding very repetitive, and I'm sure I've crossed the Rubicon a long time ago, the point that I'm trying to make here is the same applies with our thoughts. Because the second surprise of this podcast is that I'm finally going to address being a people pleaser. not in its entirety, right? Because there are many facets to being a people pleaser. But in this episode, I want to discuss, you know, a very deep part of being a people pleaser, and that is in this mental habit that we have that manifests itself in a variety of different actions. It's not just that singular thing of doing your bed every morning, but the habit is in the the foundation of our thoughts, right? And therefore, in that foundation informs multiple actions, and that we have cemented that foundation by making the same choice again and again and again and again, to the point where the brain no longer questions the foundation. It no longer seeks to rebuild and recreate said foundation every day with every decision, because it has enough evidence to back its prediction, and therefore it is choosing to, save that mental energy and spend it on something new, right? Something that actually has, a risk of going one way or the other. But here in this area, we know for a fact that this foundation will remain the same. And the foundation that I refer to is the act of choosing against oneself. You know what I mean? The act of choosing someone else's comfort over our own. The act of betraying oneself, basically. Because as a people pleaser, one could even say that it comes quote unquote naturally, right? To help people, to do whatever other people need, you know what I mean? To be a support system, just to be there for people, right? Sometimes the mask of being a people pleaser is, the mask of being useful, right? Of being a helper. Um, the mask of being caring, right? That, oh, no, I'm just a really considerate person, you know what I mean? I'm very empathetic, and I just want people to feel safe around me. Or it's not that big of a deal, I just don't want to make a fuss. Like, it's okay, you know what I mean? And it isn't okay. It isn't okay, but we have put other people above ourselves so many times that we don't even think about it anymore. We don't even see what we're doing anymore. That we can mindlessly go through life and reject ourselves at every corner and choose other people above ourselves at every single corner without even thinking. Because we've betrayed ourselves so many times that there's really no point in even questioning whether we'll do it again. It is a guarantee. And I think that is the pain of sort of coming to the realization that, like, oh my gosh, I have people pleaser tendencies. And then to slowly look around your life and to see where that people pleaser has cropped its ugly head in every facet of your life. That maybe, the reason why your bosses love you so much is because they benefit from you betraying yourself in every interaction you have with them. That you place their value and everyone else's value above your own. That you're such an indispensable member of the team because you never complain, and you're always just up for extra work, and you never say no, and you just push yourself so much, and you give 110% to the company, and you're a star, baby. You have zero boundaries with people and your work and everything. You have no boundaries, even with yourself, right? Because boundaries are a system of care, and you don't care about yourself. We've already established that, right? And obviously, yes, being a people pleaser comes at different levels, right? It shows its head in different ways, and it might not be the same for everyone, right? There might be certain areas in your life where you are able to set boundaries, and in some areas you're not. You know, I know a lot of people who in relationships struggle to speak up for themselves and become a people pleaser in romantic relationships, but in other areas of their lives they're quite strong and, assertive and all of these things, right? So to each his own. But what I wanted to speak about was just that mental habit that at every and any point in our lives, when we were faced with a crossroads where we had to choose between ourselves and the comfort of someone else, or pleasing someone else, or appeasing someone else, right? That we chose that other person over ourselves. And that now we have reached the point of even being classified as a people pleaser, because that is, the final step. That's a sign that we have crossed over from, a tendency to a state of being, from, I don't know, sometimes she does her bed, sometimes she doesn't, I guess, I don't know, to, yeah, come rain or shine, that bitch is doing her bed. You know what I mean? We've crossed over, and it sucks. It really does suck. So yeah, this is a sneak peek into the People Pleaser series. It is not going to be cute. I will try my best to speak honestly about the different ways in which I have betrayed myself, and the different ways that I've observed, people around me betray themselves as well, and how I have slowly, and how I plan to slowly dig myself out of this hole. Because I think that, a big issue that I have with myself is that I struggle to keep promises to myself, right? That if I promise so and so that I am going to do whatever, like I will stay up all night to make sure that it is done. I will go above and beyond to do something that I've promised for someone else. And I take pride in being a woman of my word, but that's a lie, because I don't keep promises to myself. If I truly am a woman of my word should matter to me first before it matters to anyone else, right? But that's not the case. Instead, I can't trust myself to keep a simple promise. And therefore, it is hard for me to build good habits, because I am trying to build something solid on shaky ground. Because the foundation of my thoughts are not based in anything that is beneficial to me. That my core foundation is that other people matter more than me. That I don't matter at all. And that my only value in existing on this planet is in the things I do for others. That my value is something that is earned, that is bought through hard labor and sacrifice. That my existence is already an inconvenience, and therefore there's no need for me to even try to make room for myself in any space, in any area, even if it is in my own mind. That's how much this thinking has, taken over my mind in some way. And I'm not saying that the same applies to you, right? I might be living on the extreme end of the spectrum, but it is something to think about. In what areas of your life do you betray yourself? Is it in your finances, where, like me, I just got my bonus this month, and I'm all of a sudden making some really wild purchases that I really don't need to be making, right? But once again, I've betrayed myself because I want to save up to buy a house, right? Financial security and physical safety and security matter a lot to me. They really do. It is the one thing that I worry about the most, right? My financial future and just having a home that is mine that no one can take away. Those things matter to me. But as much as they matter to me, I don't have the habit of caring for the things that matter to me. I don't have the habit of caring about myself at all. I do, though, have the habit of, you know, caring for other people, caring about what other people think of me, right? Even if it is a random stranger, someone I will never see again, I will still choose them over me. That's the habit that I have. So then it becomes hard to do even simple things like saving up, like being disciplined with my money. Somebody needs something, I'm there. Budget be damned. My friend wants to go out and do whatever, sure, I'll pay, because you're already being so kind by wanting to hang out with me. The least I can do is pay, to make up for the inconvenience I caused you by having to spend time with me. I'll pay the bill, don't worry. Right? There I am betraying myself every single time because what I truly want is to feel safe, right? And I have built the habit of placing my safety in other people, that if they like me, then they will protect me. If they like me, then I'll be fine. When being liked by strangers is never going to provide the security that I need. If I just accept myself and accept myself for who I am, accept my life, just take pleasure in the fact that I'm here and I'm alive, delight in my own existence, that is the only true security, like emotional security, that is guaranteed. Because people are fickle, people are so fickle, and I cannot place my value, right, and my worth in the opinions of other people, in their imagination. I do not want to exist limited by other people's imagination. I want my life to be a reflection of how expansive my imagination is, that I can be and do whatever I set my mind to because I'm smart and I'm creative and I deserve to and am capable of doing and being whatever. That's what I want. However, I haven't built habits that reflect that. And yes, much like the making of the bed that might have started in childhood and may have just been a response to, an instruction from a parent or your environment as a whole, or an attempt to create peace in your life, right? To prepare for any possible eventuality and to make sure that your day ends well, right? How do you preempt certain things? So therefore you do need to be sensitive to other people's emotions, right? You do need to be able to be finely attuned into other people's internal environments in order to be able to predict and prepare what you need to do in order to stay safe, right? That value set hasn't changed. The need for safety hasn't changed. It's just that when you were setting these habits, you needed a different type of safety. So you did what you needed to do to stay safe. And in some ways, that meant being a people pleaser, which you now call being empathetic because you have this magical power of just knowing how other people feel. You have this magical power of being very adaptive, to any environment, and you just fit in anywhere. And that's because it's not you fitting in. It's you becoming what the space wants of you. That you're never really truly yourself anywhere, because you are just a reflection of what other people want and expect of you. So part of my process of trying to unlearn and undo these things is understanding that I need to make room for myself. That inner child that stood there waiting to be chosen, hoping that maybe today will be the day Lebu chooses me, and instead she chooses that other person, and the next day she tries again and she's like, maybe today is the day, and it doesn't happen time and time again, and to the point now that she's given up. She doesn't even bother to turn around to see the results because she knows. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to change the statistics. I'm going to have to choose myself enough times for us to at least get back to will she or won't she? And maybe sometimes I will choose myself. And maybe sometimes I'll, I'll fall back into bad habits and I'll choose another person over myself. But at least let me choose myself again and again and again. Let me try again and again and again. I might have maybe 1 or 2 weeks where I was really good. I stood up for myself. I set boundaries. I did, I saved a bit of money, and, wow, I had an amazing week. And then boom, get a little depressed, your period comes around, or just whatever. You're super stressed at work, and all this pressure, and also the anxiety and the stress that comes with exposing yourself like that, right? Because you've never done this thing before. You've never even considered, right, in your mind, like, what are you supposed to do now if you're not doing your bed, right? Your mind is like freaking out, like, what the hell, we've broken protocol, guys. And it's stressful, right? So even though maybe some part of yourself is really proud that you've had a good week and you stood up for yourself, there's also a lot of fatigue that comes with having to now actually think about things, right? Because those processes were on autopilot for so long. You're having to blow off the dust on machinery that, was basically discontinued at this point. But you're there and you're exhausted and the anxiety is too much. So you choose just the other person because it's the easy option, right? You have the muscle memory for that. That doesn't mean that you failed. Much like my weight loss journey, I will be regular for 2 minutes and then I'll, fall off the bandwagon. And before, I used to really just hate myself. Like, oh my gosh, I've fallen off the wagon and now everybody's judging me and, I failed and da 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 da. But the point is, my attempts are still on the scoreboard. I'm slowly but surely turning this boat around. It's not a full, hard left or hard right. I'm slowly inching the steering wheel. And yes, sometimes I let go of the steering wheel and it rotates back, to its comfortable position. But that's okay because once I grab hold of it again, it's not going to fully make it all the way back by the time I grab it. So there I've made progress. And no matter how many times I slip up, I will eventually get to where I'm going. But the point is that I don't stop turning, that once I finally grab hold of that steering wheel again, that I continue to keep turning. That's it. That's all you have to do. Is when you have it within you to act. And if you need to pause, or if for whatever reason you can't make, this decision that you want, then sure, give yourself grace in that moment and get back to it. So As much as I wanted this week's episode to be short, as I'm sure you can see, it turned out to be long anyway. But at least our cumulative time will be less than an hour. So, winner, winner, chicken dinner, I guess. However, I think it is important to say that be kind to yourself through all of this. With this week's homework, I am asking you to just look at the foundation of the decisions you make, right? You can start at your habits and move backwards, right? What are the things that you do without thinking? And where do those things come from, right? Are there things that are popping up in your life that you don't like? And you feel as if you have no control over these things. They just happen, right? You just find yourself like, oh, how could I do this to myself again? You know? In those moments, you might want to recognize that thought process, right? The foundation of that thought process that has led you to this thing that you're not happy about. You might want to consider that as a habit and then say, okay, how do I break this habit, right? Because by acknowledging it as a habit, you'll also be able to acknowledge that this is no longer an active choice that you are making, that this is a choice that you made a long time ago. And you made this choice many times, but now you need to look back at the origin of this choice, the origin story of this thread, and look at the context in which it was created. You might find that those circumstances no longer apply to your current life. And as you do so with grace, it might then be easier to then make a different choice moving forward as you acknowledge that, you know what, I'm not in that circumstance anymore. I don't live with my parents anymore. I'm not with that manipulative, controlling, abusive partner anymore. I am not at that school, whatever. I'm not there anymore. And therefore, this decision no longer applies. It served me then, and I am grateful for the version of me that needed to survive and did what it could. But I am here now, and I'm here to tell that version of me that it is okay, they can let go. And that slowly, 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 before even getting into the habit of making, creating a different set of foundational core beliefs, that we can get into the habit of being gracious with ourselves, with being gracious with every part of ourselves, current, former, future, all of that. That we can get into the habit of looking at our lives, looking at ourselves with kindness, care, and compassion. You know what you've been through. You know what life has brought to you. You know what you've cried over, what you've suffered through. And that is not something to be taken lightly or something to be dismissed. Be kind to yourself. Nothing ever changes through hate. Hating yourself into a better life is not going to work. Hating yourself into a quote-unquote better body is not going to work. Shaming yourself into saving is not going to work. It takes kindness and care. Those are the things that are sustainable. And believe it or not, as much as you may be looking at your life, looking at these, habits that you would no longer like to have, right? That at some point down the line, at some point, this decision was a decision of care. That at some point you made that decision in an attempt to care for yourself in some way. So now you are in the position to make a different choice, to care for yourself again. And maybe down the line, you will look back at this decision and say, okay, that's what you needed to do then, but we don't need to do that anymore. This is what we need to do now. And that is okay too. You don't have to safeguard yourself from the future. All you need to do is be present in right now and safeguard yourself or protect yourself. Take care of yourself right now. That's it. That's all you need to do. So, let's get into the habit of taking care of ourselves, and let's look at any habits that don't reflect that desire, that don't reflect the life that we want, internally and externally. So yeah, I hope I didn't get too lost in the weeds there. It's been a really long week, and exhaustion is my middle name at this point. But yeah, it was weighing heavy on my mind. I think because I was trying really hard to be mindful this week, and that mindfulness exposed a lot of areas in my life where I choose other people over myself for the sake of keeping the peace. But yeah, later on down the line, we will go deeper into this people-pleasing issue, and we will talk about, the difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping, the dangers of biting one's tongue, and all of those things, right? So yeah, have a good week. Take care of yourself, and I will see you soon. Goodbye. Oh, also, don't forget to turn on your notification bells, because next week Wednesday it's going down. Oh, not next week Wednesday, this week Wednesday. It's going down. So, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I know I went on a tangent for most of the episode, but I hope I tied it all together in the end. And I hope you found it to be a bit thought-provoking and maybe encouraging. I know that I can be really strict with myself, so oftentimes when I find myself in this podcast sharing my thoughts, halfway through it, I kind of just catch myself and I'm like, oh, but I have to be kind, because I don't talk to other people the way I talk to myself. So recording these podcasts have been a really nice exercise in being kind when talking about things that I am going through. So thank you for listening, and thank you for taking part in this exercise. So next week we are getting back to talking about life as a thickums, and we will be talking about traveling while fat, because wow, being thick has its disadvantages, but it also has its advantages. And I will be talking about the good, bad, and the ugly of being a thick bitch in these streets. And again, I love you all. Be kind to yourselves, and I will see you next time.